And so first, we have Alexandra Simonton, and she is the Director of Strategy at IU Health Foundation. If everyone can give a wave and a smile to Alex and thank her for giving her time for us today. And just thank you for your LinkedIn profile says that you are a healthcare change agent. And so I just have to take my hat off to you because boy, what a season to be an agent for change. And we need you now more than ever. And so, so we're excited to have you and your enthusiasm about cultivating healthcare equity here with us this afternoon. Also joining us as a featured panel is Jeffrey Caesar, who is the VP of Strategic Projects. If everyone can give a warm wave and welcome to Jeff and thanking him for his time and all the work that he is doing to provide optimal healthcare to his community. And lastly, but certainly not least, I would like to welcome Anthony or Tony Colon.
Yes, Cologne.
Cologne. I want to make sure I'm pronouncing that correct. So thank you, Tony Cologne, for joining us. He is the Associate Director and Chief Operating Officer of the VA for Northern Indiana Healthcare System. And so thank you, Tony, not only for your presence, but for the service that you're providing those who have committed their life to this country. So as you can hear from the backgrounds that we have joining us, that there is some rich conversation from varying perspectives to come. And so for those of you who were not with us for part one of our conversation, part one centered all around the conversation of how do we pivot in the midst or during a pandemic. And so we talked about, my belief that we're all seeing in the news about this great resignation and how there's been more change happening than any other time in history when it comes to career trajectory. And I share it with the group that I firmly believe that a big part of that is that because we are all so busy and overworked, a lot of times we get away from our why. And I've been working with healthcare administrators long enough to know that many of us are not, we didn't necessarily choose a career path, but the healthcare profession is one that chooses us. And so I thought a fun way to start today's conversation, Alex, Tony, and Jeff, if you could share with us, when did you first know that you were called to healthcare?
Hi, I'll go ahead and jump in here. Thanks again for having me on the panel. And Rachel, it's great to meet you. In terms of when I felt called to enter into a healthcare career, definitely from an early age was interested in healthcare. I really saw that as the field where you can make a difference in people's lives. And so originally I thought that it would manifest in a clinical role, being a doctor or something of that nature, but discovered the business side probably towards the end of my college experience and was able to pursue my graduate degree in health administration. So it's really been always part of my, healthcare was always kind of part of my career goal. I just didn't know that it would be on the business side.
Yeah, I can go next. Mine is very much different than that. Very unconventional. I grew up wanting to be a lawyer. That's what I wanted to do. And which in hindsight personally sounds terrible to me. So I'm really happy I am where I'm at. So long story short, actually, my plan was get out of college, go work, travel, come back, go to law school. So actually was living in Brazil, the country, and I was working for a nonprofit for about a year and needed to make a little extra money. So this physician that I knew, this friend of mine said, why don't you just come in on the weekends and do some book work for me? So I started doing that like 4 hours a day, and I found myself wanting to keep going back. And I just loved doing that and coming back during operating hours and just seeing the patients and seeing the value they were bringing to the community. Just that's kind of when I personally knew. So I knew nothing about healthcare. I couldn't tell you one thing about it, how it worked. So I decided to come back, and I think this conversation would be really good because I had no experience in healthcare, and then trying to get into that field, kind of the things I did, including going to graduate school, which to me was one of the best decisions I ever made. So that's kind of how I knew.
So my story is similar to that of Alex, in the fact that I kind of knew coming out of high school that I wanted to go into healthcare. However, coming out of high school, didn't have the funding, didn't have the ability to go to college at that point. So I joined the service straight out of high school. The recruiter promised me that I would be able to go into a healthcare career field when I got to basic training. And then the next thing, 6 weeks later, I'm being shipped off to California to be a logistics tech, and realized pretty quickly that I'm not a strong manual labor type of guy. Kind of don't prefer that. So was able to cross train in the Air Force, got into field medicine, attempted to go back to college to be a PA, started a family, got a job as a restaurant manager to pay for all of that, and realized, wow, I really like the number crunching. I really like the overall control and setting the pace, setting the vision, that kind of a thing. And so just followed that in through the Air Force, moved into the healthcare administration realm of the Air Force, and that led to the VA, and then here I am.
Well, thank you, Tony, for your service, and for the three of you for sharing your story. I'm not going to say I told you so, but the theme that you probably heard as you listen to each of these career trajectories, even though they're much different in path, it's similar that there wasn't a lot of certainty in terms of how to get to where they are, or that they even wanted to be where they are now, until they had experiences that led them along that path. And so I imagine that everyone has a similar interest as me as to hearing more about the pieces of your story that relate to career transitioning. And so so if each of you can share more of your specific story with us regarding your experience with either transitioning career paths or advancing into a new position.
Yeah, I think for me, I had about 4 or 5 months of experience in a different country, and so that doesn't really translate with moving back here and trying to figure out. I didn't know what I wanted to do, to be honest. I knew I wanted to be in healthcare. I liked working in the practice, but as we all know, there's so many different areas of healthcare that you can be involved in. If someone asked me the question, I just didn't have a good answer. So my aim when I got back was to, figure out how do I get my foot in the door, and how do I, one, and two, how do I figure out what I want to do? And for me, it was taking a lot of unpaid internships at the time. I must have had probably 6 or 7 internships from the time before even graduate school, right before graduate school. I offered to work for people for free all the time. And then secondly, during graduate school, I did as much as I could to figure out what I wanted to do, and then build relationships and build my network. And so that was really tough. I'm not going to say that was easy, but that was sort of my strategy of, coming home, I know what I want to do. I want to be in this area. Don't know exactly what that looks like, but let me sort of reach out and get to know as many people as possible and learn as much as I can about a bunch of different things, so I can sort of narrow down and hone in on what my passion is and where I feel I can best use my skill sets.
Jeff, I don't know if you noticed this, but nobody smiled when you said the dirty words of free work,
Yeah.
free internship. But I appreciate your transparency with that and sharing this, because I do think that there are 4 nuggets that we'll end up touching on that are required for a successful career transition and or an advancement. And what you described is absolutely that. It's, you know, it's developing a strategy to gain experiences in some way, shape, or form, even if it's not in a formal position orientation. And, you know, the challenge and truth is that I think the only time that you're hired for your potential is when you are hired for a position straight out of college. But I think at every point after that, you're always doing the work before you get paid for it. At least that's just the theme that I've seen in, you know, the hundreds of individuals that I've either coached or supported on their career path. And I'm seeing a lot of heads nod, you know, and as leaders, I'm sure that many of you are seeing similar trends. And so I want to invite Alex and Tony to hop in here and tell us a little bit more about your career path in terms of the career transitions or promotions that you've earned.
Sure. So when I think about kind of how I've gotten to where I currently am, which is in a gratifying healthcare career, I think it starts really at grad school, where I was really able to think through what kind of experiences can I have that will set myself apart from my peers. I knew that I wanted to pursue an administrative fellowship, and I knew that they were very competitive programs. And so I thought, how can I take advantage of different opportunities at the school or in the community that can really build my resume and hopefully stand out in the application process? And thankfully, I was able to secure a fellowship with IU Health. And through that experience, it was a 2-year program where I did a number of projects and rotations. I really focused on networking and again, thinking through how can I set myself apart? What are some of the unique projects or rotations that I can get my hands in and really build my resume? And so I've kind of approached my career transitions in that way. And I think 2 things specifically that I would call out from my fellowship experience, in addition to knowing I would need to be networking with the right executives, I also wanted to make sure when I was working with them that I was, you know, going above and beyond and, you know, doing a little bit more than what was even asked. And I think that was really how I was able to set myself apart in the fellowship program and then ultimately secure a job out after the program. And then I would also just highlight another transition. After the fellowship program, I took a role with the Indy suburban region of IU Health. And because I wanted to get a different scope and have a little bit more responsibility, I ended up pivoting kind of to a different business unit. And so now I'm with the foundation. And so I think oftentimes when you think about advancing your career, you do have to make pivots. Sometimes it can be at a different business unit, a different company, and there can be some non-traditional paths that you take. And I think being part of the foundation is somewhat of a non-traditional path for someone with a healthcare administration background. I did not have any experience in philanthropy previously, but I will say that I did have a small project during my time as a fellow with the foundation. And so there was that connection. And so I think that's something that I would call out. It's not always, you know, the career path that you think, but sometimes you have to get creative to get those experiences.
Yeah. Wow, Alex. I mean, so many gems that I could pull out there. But one thing that I will hone in on that you talked about is just being really clear on your competitive edge, or that's just another way of saying of what helps you to stand out on your career path, which I think is really important, because I think when we get to a point in our career where we feel like a change is near or needed, or we're seeking a promotion, there is some vulnerability that comes there, and sometimes a feeling of of trying to make ourselves like fit into the box so that we come off as the perfect fit to our potential employer. But the truth is that, changing career paths is really, it's a two-edged sword, right? You're not only at a deficit for your skill sets, you're coming to the table with a whole different perspective. Jeff talked about how he, was going to law school or thought he was going to be a lawyer. And even if he never went down the path that he thought he would have, maybe being in the courtroom, I'm sure that the skill sets that he developed on that path, you still use them and they still serve you well. And it for both of you, the previous experiences that you have, you still, that lens, it comes into play into the new positions that you're in, even if you don't have the typical background that most people do enter in your role. And so anyone who's listening who is, feeling sometimes like that the barrier that they're up against is that their background is a little bit unique in terms of what people are typically looking for in the role you're pursuing. It's important to remember that, yes, while that could be a thing that could stand in your way, if you are clear on your competitive edge, as Alex said, and what you're bringing to the table, it also could be the very thing that helps you to stand apart among the competition, which happens a lot in healthcare right now because things within the last decade have shifted so much, and there has been more of an appreciation for having other backgrounds or more business orientation, mindset. And so it's not always a negative attribute to have those unique experiences in your back pocket. And Tony.
Yeah, so one thing I would say, and Rachel, you kind of touched on this a little bit, is very early on, I was told by a mentor that I needed to work at the level that I wanted to be and not wait till I got there to start doing the work, right? And so that was a big piece of it, especially in the military, where as you promote up, there are less and less opportunities for those key positions, and you really have to show why you are the stronger person, so to speak. The other thing that anybody who's ever served or been around anybody who's ever served, the very first thing they tell you is don't volunteer for anything, right? Well, I would argue that volunteering for things, A, helps you say, wow, I like this, or B, man, I do not ever want to do this again. But it also expands your network. It expands your understanding of how things function. And you never know when that skill set or when that experience will pay dividends later. The other thing that I was really quick to do was to jump on every training opportunity, whether I thought it was going to have immediate value or not. Even with ACHE, early on, I took the negotiation class, I took the strategic planning class, the 2-3 day programs, and initially they weren't of much value. But now in the role that I sit in today as the COO, negotiation is a part of my job every day, and I picked those skill sets up while going to some training that was offered that nobody else wanted to go to. And I'm like, I'll go, and so that's a part of it. My transition was a little bit different, obviously, because military health is a different breed. And then federal health, the VA, is even more different than that. So it's always interesting for me to participate in these events with the non-federal entities, because the whole focal points are different, and what you're kind of looking at is a little bit different. But that goes back to the more you're engaged with outside of your box, the more nuggets you can pick up, and those bits and pieces. It really, in my opinion, kind of helps the transition. And the one place where the transition was the biggest for me was that at one point the VA asked me if I was willing to take a $15,000 a year pay cut to get on the right path to where I'm at today, because the path I was on was not the right path. And after some soul searching and some discussion at home, we said, okay, we're going to take that cut. We're going to go back 3 steps. in order to get to where we ultimately wanted to be, and to do something completely out of my wheelhouse. And then again, that process led me to where I'm at today, and just having those experiences.
Well, again, Tony, not a single smile came across the screen with that, or with the $15,000 pay cut. But you know what? And you know, I even challenge everyone to think critically about what Tony just said about, you know, speaking to that person who may have told us, you know, never do any kind of work for free. And, you know, maybe playing devil's advocate, I don't disagree with that person. But the truth is, if you're in a position where you're taking on a voluntary role, or whether that be internally to your institution or you're volunteering with an outside institution, if you are taking on experience that you need and want to progress in your career, but haven't done it before, are you really working for free if they're not paying you? No, you're gaining experience, you're expanding your network, because chances are you're going to be put on task force and committees with other professionals who are advanced in this area. And, you know, we like to think very highly of ourselves, and I believe that we should, but let's be honest, whoever is allowing you to do this work, they're taking a gamble on you if you've never done it before as well. And so I think, you know, coming to the table just with that paradigm shift of, you know, just because it's not a full-time salary paid job that you're taking on, it doesn't mean that you're necessarily, you know, working for free. If it is, you know, if it's a mutually beneficial kind of partnership that you're developing with an institution. And I say that, the context is important, because, you know, in a time where we are being very intentional about how we look at equity in the workforce, all too often I do see cases where there are women or there are people of color who have, you know, extensive experience, and then they're being asked to do work, you know, for free. And they are being things that are contributing to, you know, pay gap inequity. And so, you know, so to that person who is just very passionate about the work that you do, and wanting to give back to the profession, as we all should, I'm not implying that you should make a career of doing things, you know, without being properly compensated. And so the conversation is getting really good. And so I think this will be a good time to share with our panelists what you all said in your results. So everyone, you should be seeing a screen pop up on your screen right now. And it looks like almost everyone participated in just in sharing, you know, what has been the greatest barrier to advancing your career. This is what we asked everyone as they came. And there may be, if you were one of the individuals who wrote other, I do invite you in the chat, if you feel comfortable, to say in the chat, what are some of the challenges that you've been up against, and when it comes to either advancing, being promoted in your career, or just in making a career shift, so that we can be keeping you in mind as we share our responses. But from the results here, it looks like it's a pretty close toss up between just being unsure where to begin, and having an under-established network. And so with that in mind, I'm going to put Alex, Jeff, and Tony in the hot seat right now. And you guys gave some really good advice in terms of how you successfully navigated your career changes. But I've been in the game long enough to know that it probably wasn't all smooth sailing all the time. And so I'm interested in just hearing from you, what was your greatest barrier when it comes to successfully advancing or transitioning careers? And in that, if you can just keep in the back of your mind that it seems like a healthy chunk of us just don't know where to start when it comes to seeking advancement and career change, and we're lacking that network that we think we need to make it happen. And I know that was a mouthful. So again, the primary question here that I'm looking to hear from you is just, what would you say has been your greatest barrier when it comes to advancing your career?
So I'll go first on that, if you don't mind. the biggest challenge that I think has to do with, I think we're going to talk about a little bit later, but helping people understand your transferable skill sets, right? So I have to, on a regular basis, not as much now, but early on in my VA career, had to really help my leadership understand that what I had done in the military, how that translates into the VA. I would also say that from something similar, that if you've done, volunteer board work, or if you've been a volunteer for an organization and you had the opportunity to lead a project or do something along those lines, articulating that to the places that you're trying to work or the people that you're working for, to understand that you actually do fit into that puzzle. Just because you didn't get it from another hospital or another healthcare system, you did do something that you can easily transferable and move into that. That has been the biggest challenge for me, is helping folks understand my life's experiences and how they translate into what they need me to do.
Yeah, and and Tony, maybe before we hear from Alex and Jeff, I'm going to ask you to elaborate on that a little bit, just in case we have other participants who have a military background. I think this could be especially helpful. And so I think the follow-up question that's coming to my mind is, can you provide an example of what you consider to be a transferable skill?
Yeah, so a prime example is that, I don't know, it's been 10, 15 years ago, but there was a reorganization of the Air Force Medical Corps, right? And as part of that, they needed to take all of the units in the Air National Guard and conform them to FEMA regions. And you guys have, for our FEMA region, FEMA 5 is, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, et cetera, et cetera. And as part of that, they wanted to move assets around so that it made the most sense for quick reactionary teams. Part of my role or responsibility at the time was to bring all these people together, all of these type A personalities, all of these people that wanted to protect their resources and their assets, and convince them that we had to do what was in the best interest of the organization. We needed to take the names out of it, the faces out of it, the personalities out of it, and we need to make that work. And we did that, right? Well, now when I come to my situation now, where many of you have seen the news that the VA is preparing to do some adjustments and make some modifications, it's the same kind of thing. As we've got to be able to pull the stakeholders together, help them understand what's the big picture and what really makes sense in this, and how to do what's right for the veterans. But there was a period of time in my career where people didn't understand that I had had that level of experience and I had dealt with that high level of communication, and I really had to kind of keep bringing that back to the table and do some smaller stuff until they ultimately saw that I had that ability to do the bigger stuff. Does that help answer your question?
Yes, yes, and yes. And so the thought that I hope that everyone listening walks away with is to understand that it's your job to connect the dots between how your experiences that you have translate to the position you're trying to pursue. It's not the responsibility of the employer. That's the kind of feedback that I'll get sometimes is, I know I can do this, or, they know that I can do this. I've been here for 20 plus years. And, I think sometimes we put too much responsibility on whether it be our managers or whether it be the person who we are trying to sell ourselves for the position to connect those dots. And so it's our responsibility to do that ourselves on our resume or when we are having networking and interviewing conversations. So Tony, I appreciate you allowing me to put you on the spot. And if we do have fellow veteran members who are tuning in, I want to make sure that you know that on ACHE's website, there is a section that is devoted to varying affinity groups. And one resource that I know many of our veteran members has found helpful is a military experience resume translator. And so where you're able to put in some of the experiences that you had during the time that you served. And I guess I'm speaking more so to someone who may have recently left the military, because the way that you may have had your resume structured while serving that served you very well, it's a completely different ballgame for civilian-based positions. And Tony's nodding his head, and I know I'm getting into the weeds, but I want to make sure that anyone that applies to knows that these are resources available to you, and we can have, if this applies to you, we can have some sidebar conversation in the breakouts about this. Just let me know so that I can make sure you end up in Tony's group. And so, yes, so the gems keep coming. And so I will turn the floor over to either Alex or Jeff to share with us what you found to be some of your greatest barriers when it comes to transitioning.
Yeah, so yeah, I think piggybacking off, Tony had just some great some great advice there. And especially when you're younger and trying to figure out what you want to do, you're older and still want to figure out but you don't have that experience. Absolutely honing in on what is transferable, because you have some experience. It may not be what the experience that maybe they're actually looking for in the job description or what their predetermined thoughts are. But absolutely, and my example is coming back from a country I didn't initially speak the language. I didn't know anybody. I was expected to kind of figure it out. And so my whole strategy was, look, I'm adaptable and I can problem solve and I love to learn. Okay. And here's what I want to do. I don't have the experience, and I'll admit that, but I guarantee you I'm going to work hard and I'll figure it out. And I think if I, in a very confident but not arrogant way, make those connections, I think what Tony said is like golden. And that is one really good strategy that you need to make sure that you develop to kind of get over those barriers. And so my personal greatest barrier in some ways was kind of getting over myself, and sort of like, I didn't know myself and what I wanted to do, but it was deeper than that. It was like, I never really sat down and journaled what I like, what I don't like, and where that could possibly fit in, and what my expectations really were, what my goals really were. And so I don't think I did that initially. And it's not until someone kind of spoke into my professional career and said, you might want to do this, that I felt like I got over some of those barriers that I was experiencing, and not having the relationships and not having the experience per se in healthcare.
Yeah, if that wasn't the perfect interview response, if I've never heard it before, is, he kind of just breezed past it. So if anyone missed it, there are going to be occasions where you are pursuing an opportunity where it's going to come up in the conversation that there's a part of the position that's a qualification that you don't have. I know healthcare professionals like numbers. And so if you want to think about when you're applying to a position, if you have 75 to 80% of what the role is calling for, you're qualified. Employers don't want to hire you if you have 100% of what the role asks for, because then that means they have to come in offering you, top bar in terms of where that position ranks. And they don't want to do that, because chances are you're going to get bored and not stay. So it's not, so don't feel compelled to be misleading about your experience. For the most part, the conversation will be centered around relevant experience that you have. And when you get hit with one of those situations, do exactly what Jeff just said right now, that, hey, you're right, that is, I noticed that was a gap in my experience, but I lived overseas and I had to learn a second language and quickly to be able to survive and function. And so that is why, and even if you don't have that kind of example, you can give any example about regarding how you learned a skill quickly and under pressure, and just voice that you're going to attack that area of the role with that same energy. And that's the perfect way to address gaps if there's no tangible experience that you can put on the table. Alex?
Yeah, thank you. I think for me, some of the challenges I faced when advancing or transitioning into a new position, well, let me start by saying I no longer really lean into the early careerist label, but realistically, I'm still early in my career when considering the years of experience since grad school. But I think just having, minimal years of experience and really having to finesse and make the experiences I do have that much more meaningful when I'm applying for jobs. I think it can be common when you are younger in your career. And in my case, I'm a very petite woman. You guys can't really tell that. I'm petite. I'm a petite Black woman. And I think that does come into play sometimes where there might be instances where I'm underestimated. So I think I've always tried to make sure, again, that I'm diversifying my experiences, that I'm not just doing my job. I'm doing my job well, but also that I'm taking on experiences outside of work that are going to help me hone different skills. And I think there have been times in my career where I was really stuck on a specific skill that I didn't have in the current role. An example could be people management. Everyone wants direct reports. That was something that I obsessed over at one point and really wasn't thinking about the context around that and understanding why that would be important for my next role. And really, people management, it could be important to have that experience if your next role is going to require that you're leading change, that you're shaping the culture, that you are a strong communicator, able to create clarity. And I think when you make things more tangible like that, you start to be able to find creative ways to get these skills instead of just thinking so narrowly about, I want to manage people. And so I've had to be creative in that way as well. I think another challenge, again, being on the younger side, sometimes upward mobility is something that you don't always think about. But if you have a leader who's still and who's not near retirement age, then you have to think about where can I navigate in the field to be able to get to that next level. So that's something too. There's typically a queue almost of people who are going to be up for that next opportunity. And if you're kind of lower in that queue, maybe newer to the organization or department, you have to think about that as well. And then one last thing I would add to is having a sponsor has helped kind of address those barriers. And I say sponsor, and I'm differentiating that from a mentor. When I think of a sponsor, that's really someone who can help create possibilities for you in your career. It's someone who is a decision maker, someone who can potentially address the barriers that you're facing and help you find that next position. And that's been very transformative for my career, is having people in my circle who can help me think about those next opportunities and address what I might not be able to address on my own. And I had a sponsor at one point in my career when I was thinking about transitioning to another role, ask me whether I was running to something or running from something. And I think it's just really important to make sure that your next role is a great fit and not just a fix. So having the right people in your circle to give you that kind of advice and then to break through barriers that you might be facing, it's really helpful.
Alex, what a powerful note to end on. You said, are you running to something or running away from something? And, I know that at the end of this conversation, I may not be able to share every ACHE resource that I had intended, but as if it were pre-planned for you to say that, there is a slide that provides some strategic reflection questions that you can use if you're considering making a change. And question number one is just that, is it really that you want to or need to make this career transition, or is it just that the role or the organizational culture that you're currently in isn't the right fit? You know, I also say I just appreciate your vulnerability and sharing your experience with being a woman of color, and some of the experiences that you have as someone who can attest to the fact that whenever I'm on site, you know, I can be the keynote speaker, but it's always the assumption that I'm in the wrong place, or that I'm a student, you know, who's just gotten in the wrong section. And so something that you may not know is that on a national level, the membership of ACHE, there are a growing number of professionals who are women of color, people with disabilities, people who are in typically marginalized groups, because they feel that they need that added support. And so I just wanted to commend you for that, because it is, you know, it's important for us not to be afraid to share our stories and experiences, because this may be the very space that people are looking for support. And before we break into our breakout groups, there is an additional resource that I want to make sure you all know will be in the slides that go out afterward, is that Alex talked about just this question of being clear on the climate for growth within your organizations. That's something that's a very common trend that I've seen for people who are seeking advancement, and they really perhaps love the institution that they're at and they want to stay there, sometimes even to their detriment. So one of the most important slides I've included is a questionnaire that just helps you to really reflect on if there is a climate for growth, if there is a succession plan for upward mobility within your organization. And so I won't go through every question at this present time, but I do challenge you to think about the fact that if you're answering no to three or more of the questions that I have on that slide, you might want to just explore what it might look like to move outside of your organization. Because again, to put the statistics out there, when you get promoted internally, you're likely to make somewhere around 3 to 5% of an increase in your salary. But when you move externally, you're probably going to get an increase that's something more like 7 to 17% more of your salary. And so for most of us, you know, no pun intended, it pays to look external to your current organization. If we can just do a virtual round of applause for our panelists and for their insights and just being willing to share their experiences thus far. I do want to give those of you who have a little more time to remain with us the opportunity to hear from them, maybe on a more intimate level. And so maybe just for a 10 or 15 minutes, I'm going to put us in breakout rooms. It looks like there's about 12 or 13 of us. So I'll put us in breakout rooms so that everyone can get those specific questions that you might have wrote down on your pieces of paper at the start. And then we'll come back and I'll spend a couple minutes just making sure that you all are aware of the existing ACHE resources that are available to you on a complimentary basis that you can be using to manifest some of the advice that has been put on the table today. And so Joe, Rodney, do you want me to put you in breakout rooms as well? Or should I exclude you from the count? Okay, so I will include you. So I think, why don't we say, we're gonna keep the rooms limited to about two to three folks per room, just to make sure everyone gets a chance to chat with everyone. And I'm just gonna make sure that our panelists are all separate. So, yep, we got Tony here, Jeff here, and hang on, I'm gonna move Alex and switch you. Okay, just making sure that everyone that the rooms are pretty balanced. And I'll pop in to make sure that we have a good balance of who's who. So you should be seeing the rooms hop open. Alex, Tony, and Jeff should all have their own separate rooms. We'll come back in about 10 minutes. Okay, and Rodney, before you break off into your room, I'll tell you, I think we're doing pretty good on timing wise, in terms of what I had planned agenda wise, I've intentionally shared some of those key nuggets that I know I wanted to make sure that we get to at the end, just in case if my part got cut short. I think, you know, some of the key things have been talked about already to some degree. So I'll probably end the breakout rooms. Let's see, it's already 4:30. So, you know, between 4:35, 4:40-ish, I'll wrap up to make sure I'm at least giving myself about a good 10 minutes to make sure people know what'll be in the recap slides. And then I'll turn the floor over to you to is back from our breakout rooms. And we do have an extra minute or two for questions. I know you didn't necessarily get a chance to choose in advance who you were going to be in a breakout room with. And so I wanted to extend the invitation if anyone had a question for one of the panelists who they weren't in a room with, or maybe just some good conversational questions that came up in your breakout room that you want to hear us discuss it as an entire group. I invite anyone to open up their mic or type that question in the chat right now.
I think I'll ask one of the questions that I asked. So we talk about leadership and advancing your career and career progression often as people management. And I think Alex spoke a little bit about that. But I wanted to ask, based to the panelists and everyone, based on your experiences, what are those kind of positions and what does leadership and career progression look like if people management is not involved? If, for example, you don't want to do people management, but you still want to progress your career. What I think finding that out in the healthcare space has been a little bit of a challenge for me to understand what kinds of positions are available. Not that I don't want to do people management, I would love to, but I want to know what my options are.
We talked a little bit about this, you and I, and maybe my very brief comments will help bring out some other opinions. But I've been in roles at consultant at Anthem where I was on a team of like 20 people who super high level thinkers, very good at their jobs, made a lot of important decisions, but none of us had any reports. And so you find a lot of that. It's probably less and less common specifically within healthcare systems because it's so matrix. It's almost always like you may not have someone directly reporting you, but you have to like work with so many people that it may feel that way sometimes. Consulting, a practical example is consulting is a good one that comes to my mind. A lot of times project management in some ways, it just all depends. Those are a few examples where I've seen sort of quote leadership positions that don't directly have the people influence like you're speaking to.
Yeah, Jeff, I was going to say the same thing. Definitely project management. Oftentimes there's not direct reports associated with those types of roles. Even sometimes program management or like program directors don't always necessarily have direct reports. But I think one important note that I would just add is really leadership is not a title, it's behaviors, and really anyone in any position can display leadership behavior. I think that's important to keep in mind as you progress in your career. The whole idea of leading by influence is very real. You can have a lot of influence as an individual contributor without direct reports and still have a meaningful impact in your career, on your team, in your organization.
Yeah, and if anyone missed it, Tony put in the chat, informatics, analytics. I would add to that technology, technical based positions. And so I invite you to keep any questions or thoughts coming into the chat, or open up your mic as we, as I close with just some thoughts to really capture a lot of the great ideas that were put on the table today. I started to say in the beginning or give context as to one of the reasons I think that I was invited to moderate this conversation is, the support and the key role that I've played in helping ACHE on the national level build their digital career resources and mentor program. And as a principal consultant, I've served as an executive coach. I'm a professor on topics related to HR management and DEI strategy. And so I think with this, unique blanket of experiences, the unique perspective that I bring into conversations like this is that on a daily basis, I may be talking to a student who is entry level and just trying to figure out if they even want to be on the career path they're on, all the way up to the C-suite to, the top level executives who are making the decisions that will influence or impact, the entry level professionals and their decisions. And so as I listened to our conversation today, you're going to see me sharing my screen shortly here. But as I listened to each of all of the feedback that we got from our panelists today, I don't think I would change any of these 4 key nuggets that I plan to reemphasize. Maybe the only thing I would add to the table was Alex's point about being clear on your competitive edge. That's embedded into some of the conversation we'll have, but I think it's big enough where it could stand on its own. But if I had to identify the 4 key steps or the 4 nuggets when it comes to career advancement and transitioning, is these 4 things that have organically come up in our conversation. Is number 1 is being prepared. I think one of the most frustrating things when we are job searching or thinking about making a change is knowing that we're doing all the right things, but we haven't landed that position yet. And so it's keeping in mind that sometimes it's not you, it's so many variables that come into play for a position to open up for you. It's, timing is everything. And I think the current climate that we're in of the pandemic is evident of that. I would not call the pandemic a season of luck for anyone by any circumstance. I would never use that language, but I'm sure you've heard the quote that has been circulated, by Oprah, that luck is just when preparedness meets opportunity. And that's what's happened during the pandemic, is that you've had leaders unexpectedly step away because they didn't want to deal with the stress or just even being vulnerable in a place of vulnerability during the pandemic. And so what did that do? That opened up opportunities for middle managers and even entry-level professionals to progress in their career, more quickly than they may have otherwise. That's nothing that anyone could have planned for, but because those individuals were prepared, they may have found themselves advancing or with a job opportunity sooner than planned. The second step is developing a strategy. We've said it once or twice today already that leaders who successfully advance or find new positions, typically they're already doing the job before they ever get the title. The third step being leveraging your network. We didn't talk a ton about that. And so I'll probably use my 5 minutes here to emphasize what I mean about that. But, the case for transferable skills, which we focused a lot of our conversation on today, that's half the battle. If you can make a strong spiel like Jeff did about why you believe the experiences that you have may make up for the ones that you don't. In addition to that, if Jeff has a previous employer or, an in at the organization to say, oh yeah, any organization who has that guy is lucky to have him, that's going to help seal the deal. And so being more intentional about developing and leveraging your network will be highly important, especially if you are transitioning into a role that's different than something that you have experience already doing. And then lastly, again, we didn't talk a lot about this, but maybe most important of all, is knowing when to move on. The truth be told is that just like when you start a new position, if you know that it was the right move, I know this. I know that people within the first 2 weeks, people are in a new job. They know if this is somewhere they're going to be for a while, or if they're going to be moving on soon and looking for a new position. Just know that employers typically know the same thing about you. That, it's pretty evident from the beginning if your employer sees you as someone who's high potential, that they're going to invest in and continue to grow. So chances are, if when we talked earlier about that question of, is there a clear-cut path for upward mobility at your organization? If you aren't sure, chances are, my guess is when you fill out that questionnaire that I've put throughout my slides is, the answer is probably no. Because typically if you are on a path where you're being groomed to grow with the organization and to develop and progress in your career, most of the time it's not something that you have to wonder about. And those are some of the more tough conversations that I have to have as a coach, because it's never fun to tell someone that about their about an organization that they may be very happy at, but it is to your detriment when you stay in a position far longer than you should, because you're hoping and waiting and keeping your fingers crossed about the potential of growing internally. And let me, while I'm sharing my screen, I can't see the chat, so let me, full disclosure, I am a person who does not multitask the best. Okay, I'll put the chat here in case anything I'm saying is bringing up questions for you guys. And so most of the conversation that we've had today you can really take our conversation and apply it to yourself with the tool that I mentioned earlier, ACHE's Career Edge. Now, Career Edge is a multifaceted, very comprehensive 3-step process that'll help you to develop a full-blown strategic plan for your individual career path. But I know one thing I know about healthcare professionals is that you are highly busy. And so if you don't have the time to navigate through the development of an entire career plan and go through all the tools and resources that are a part of Career Edge, if nothing else, I encourage everyone on this, in this event, including our panelists, to take the time to do step 2, which is helping you to develop a strategic career plan for yourself. Most of us do this for our employers, but we don't take the time to do it for ourselves, where your strategy is twofold. You're doing an assessment of yourself, and you're asking those questions. What's my why? That's the first question we talked about with our panelists today. Why am I even in, healthcare? And the part 2 of that self-assessment is, what do I bring to the table? What's my competitive edge, as Alex instructed us to think about? And that most of us get that far when we're navigating a job search. But the equal important time is invested into doing a full-blown market assessment. Okay, now that I know what I need and what I'm bringing to the table, what is it that the market needs right now? What has the pandemic done to the world of healthcare? What are those emerging positions that are available, so that I know what parts of my experience to really focus on my resume and then when I'm answering interview questions. And so what are the needs, and then what will be offered to me if I take on this position? So we talked about this, but in terms of a volunteer position, but you can use this for a full-time or a volunteer position, is thinking about, if I take on this role, what am I getting out of it? It's not always just about the salary. Am I getting the experience? Am I taking a pay cut, but it's putting me on the track that I want to be on to ultimately get to the position that I want to be in? Am I going to have the level of work-life balance that I want? If you're, newsflash, it's always interesting to me when someone tells me their top priority is work-life balance, but then, they want to be a healthcare administrator. It's like, you might not be on the right path. So it's just taking time to really be able to think critically about what you're saying that you want, and then getting clear on what the steps you need to take to be able to manifest those goals into reality. And so again, Career Edge is a tool that all of you have access to, complimentary. And if you have any questions about that, we can talk offline about how you can find it. Again, I'm not going to take the time to navigate through each of these slides, but I did include them, and Rodney and Joe, maybe this is more of a reference for you. I did include them for all of the context for all the individuals who maybe didn't make it to part 1. I think for anyone listening to me who's saying, that's great, Rachel. I would love to put together a plan that includes a market assessment, but I don't know where to find that kind of information in terms of what's happening in the healthcare profession. These next couple slides will help you to do that. So these are some transferable skills, if you will, or core competencies broken down depending on the area that you're interested in transitioning to. These are some of the leadership qualifications that can apply to varying positions within healthcare. And I'm including them because at the bottom, you'll see the ACHE resource that I'm pulling this information from. So again, these are more ACHE resources that are probably available to you for free that you're not aware of, such as this CEO survey identifying the top issues facing CEOs that ACHE puts out on an annual basis. And I know we have a couple students or more entry-level professionals participating. I even included this report from Cami because it's good for you to be able to see where in the healthcare arena that people or recent graduates have landed positions and fellowships, et cetera. And so I started to say, so in these 4 nuggets, right, of what I said is important, it's being prepared, it's having a strategy, which CareerEdge can help you to develop. But from my vantage point, more important probably than anything else is leveraging your network. It's to be honest, it's very rare that I see people make successful career transitions. This is not so much on the promotability side, but if you're making a complete career transition where you're changing sectors or just changing paths altogether, your network is going to be integral, because it's going to be really hard no matter how much you restructure your resume. And this is not common, I think, for coaches to admit. I know that there are suggestions about ways you can reformat your resume and things to, maybe make some of your transferable skills stand out. But if you have anything other than a chronological resume, it's not, I wouldn't say it's a red flag, but it's going to bring attention to whatever you're trying to minimize on your resume. And so I think utilizing your network and thinking about who's in your network, what positions, individuals in your network have, what kind of communities they're a part of, what resources they have that can support you, because it's not just being able to hire you. That's not the only value that one can bring to your network. And so I think, so I've provided a tool here because in the poll we took earlier, many of you said, the reason I haven't successfully navigated a change is either I don't have the network or I don't know where to start. So right here on slide 11, it's both how you can start, it's putting your list together of who to network with, and then giving you key points to focus that conversation on. Also, I have a list here of places that people tend to overlook in terms of networking. I don't think that the most effective places to network are the places that are deemed, networking events where everybody's there just, giving out business cards, and their focus is probably finding something for themselves anyway. No, some of the best places to network are even just your social events on the weekend. I'm talking about that because that's probably not something you see listed often, but what's the first thing that people say to you when you meet them, whether you're at the bar or the gym or anywhere? It's, what do you do? And even if that person doesn't work in your profession, you will be so surprised at what can come up. Oh, really? My uncle, does this, or my brother is this, I should connect you to. And I have countless stories of situations of powerful networking opportunities and new job opportunities that have come from exchanges like this. I know I was talking quickly because I want to be respectful of your time, but everything that I said will be included in the follow-up slides that'll be sent to you, as well as strategic questions for you to think about if you're making a career transition. Also, as well as a checklist for you to do some thoughtful evaluation of, should I really be holding my breath to see if a promotion comes up at my current employer, or if it's just time to completely move on. And so one just quick story I'll share as I wrap up is I remember very early in my career when I was making my own transition, I remember doing an informational interview with a woman who was transitioning and she was becoming she was currently a partner at one of the largest executive search firms. And at the time I was the one making the transition, thinking about following a path very similar to hers. And I'll never forget her story because she told me that she went on 25 interviews before she successfully transitioned into a role that she wanted to be in. And now, this was 10 plus years ago when I talked to her. And at that time, she was a partner at the executive firm that she was in. And it always makes my heart smile because I still follow her on LinkedIn and I see that she's going on to manage talent processes for major corporations such as Google. She's written books. She's a highly sought after, speaker at this point. And I know that some of those accolades sound very impressive, but I hope that you walk away thinking about that part of the story that I just breezed past, which was that she went on 25 interviews before she ever landed in the position that she wanted to be in. And, now that I'm a little more experienced, in the game and I've seen people navigate these changes successfully, I know that the reason that she was able to be resilient and consistent and still stick through to what she had in mind is because she was clear on her why. And when that opportunity finally did come up, which was probably through her network that I've been talking about, that she was well prepared for it, and she utilized her network and she wasn't afraid to move on from her current employer. And so for those of you who are seeking promotions and making changes, I just share that story as an ending cap to let you know that it's not easy for anyone, but if you do remain resilient and consistent, much like our panelists, you will be successful on that path. And so again, as I turn the floor over to Rodney, if we could give each of our panelists a warm thank you and a round of applause for their time and for their stories, and to our career development team for creating this space for us to chat today.
Wow, thank you. Thank you. And thanks again to our panelists, and thank you, Rachel, for a wonderful event. A special thank you again to, or not again, but to our IHIN administrator, Corey Josie, who does a lot of the behind the scenes work that makes our organization run smoothly. Also, I want to say thank you to Joe Primavera of the, Joe. And I also like to say thank you to Sean O'Brien, and again to you, Rachel. Before we close out today's meeting, be sure to complete the evaluation for today's program by clicking on the evaluation link that's in the chat feature. Additionally, please remember to self-report your qualified education credits through ACHE. Additionally, I want to share some upcoming events which are being shared on our screen right now. We have part 3 of this professional development event that's going to be on May 12th at 4:30 p.m. The subject is going to be politics, talking politics online. So be sure to tune in for that. We also have a RN and clinical staff retention and turnover event that is coming up on April 26th. So we look forward to seeing you there. Additionally, we have it wouldn't stick. We have a supply chain event, a precision medicine event. We have the HEPI, the annual HEPI conference that's in the summer. And within that conference, we have the Building the Hospital of Tomorrow event and the Green Hospitals and Healthcare event that's going to be within that conference. We have our annual awards that is still being planned for the fall. We have an understanding implicit bias program that's coming up, and a cybersecurity / leading information safety program that is being finalized. So we have a lot coming. Just be sure to stay tuned. we also look forward to having some of these programs in person. So the next one, the RN and clinical staff retention, that one is going to be virtual, but we are exploring in-person events after that. So again, thank you for your time today. We value your membership, and we look forward to providing opportunities to invest into your professional development such as this. Thank you and have a great rest of the evening.
Thanks, Rodney. See you.
Thanks, Rodney. Thanks, Rachel. Y'all have a great evening.
Thank you.